Have you ever wondered why the enemy keeps tempting you with lust over and over again, even though you truly don't want to fall into that sin? Why does this particular battle seem more intense, more persistent, and more exhausting than other spiritual struggles you face? Here's the truth that most Christians never understand. Whenever the enemy tempts you in a particular area repeatedly, it's because he believes there's a certain percentage, or at least a slight chance, that you might give in or fall into that temptation. Satan is not stupid, and he's not wasteful with his resources. He will not tempt you with something he knows you will clearly never give in to. Think about it. The devil will never tempt you with alcohol if he knows you have no interest in drinking. But when it comes to lust, sexual temptation, pornography, masturbation, he keeps coming back to it because somewhere in his calculations, he believes he can make you fall. The enemy always invests his energy only where he expects a return, and the reason he uses lust or people to tempt you in that particular area is because he believes that somehow, some way, you might fall into it. And every time you do fall, you prove his calculations right, and you give him even more confidence to keep attacking you in that same area. When it comes to lust and sexual temptation, there are two distinct but interconnected aspects that you need to understand. There is the fleshly aspect, and there is the spiritual aspect. Most Christians only recognize one or the other, which is why they struggle to gain complete victory. The fleshly aspect of lust is when your natural body is craving sexual gratification. This is the physical dimension of temptation. Your hormones, your natural desires, the biological impulses that God actually created, but that have been distorted by sin. Your flesh has appetites, and when those appetites aren't controlled by your spirit, they can become demanding masters that push you toward sin. Romans chapter 7 verse 23 describes this internal conflict. But I see another law in my members, warring against the law of my mind, and bringing me into captivity to the law of sin which is in my members. The Apostle Paul is describing the war between your spirit man, which wants to obey God, and your flesh, which has its own desires and demands. But the fleshly aspect is only half the battle. The spiritual aspect of lust is when forces of darkness enforce and increase the intensity of those natural desires so that you fall into sin. This is where demonic activity takes your natural, manageable temptations and amplifies them into overwhelming, almost irresistible urges. The difference between normal human temptation and demonic amplification is that normal temptations never put you under pressure, but demonic temptations always pressure you. The interesting reality is that the more you fall into the sin of lust, the weaker you actually become in that area. Some people think when they're tempted, it's just easier to give in so that the urge goes away and they can finally be left alone. They think, if I just satisfy this craving once, the temptation will stop bothering me and I can move on with my life. But honestly, this does the exact opposite of what they hope for. Jesus made this principle crystal clear in John chapter 8, verse 34. Verily, verily, I say unto you, whosoever committeth sin is the servant of sin. The word servant in Greek is doulos, which means slave, bondservant, someone who has no freedom and must obey their master. Every time you commit sexual sin, you're not satisfying a desire. You're actually strengthening chains of slavery. The Apostle Peter reinforced this truth in 2 Peter chapter 2, verse 19. While they promise them liberty, they themselves are the servants of corruption, for of whom a man is overcome, of the same is he brought in bondage. The word bondage here is doulou, which means to make a slave, to enslave completely. Peter is saying that whatever overcomes you becomes your master. This means that, over time, the more you keep falling into sexual temptation, gradually and progressively, you become a slave unto that spirit. But here's the part that will surprise you. What most Christians don't realize is that it isn't just the spirit of lust that attacks you with sexual sin. They work in groups. The spirit of lust is just the general captain whose end goal is to have you fall into lustful sin. You're not fighting one enemy. You're fighting a coordinated army of specialized spirits, each with a specific role in your destruction. First, you will have a spirit in charge of suggestion. This spirit's job is to create the right images and suggestions in your mind. This demon specializes in mental images. Its role is to create vivid mental images of sexual sin so that you can feed on those images until they become so real in your imagination that acting them out seems inevitable. This spirit doesn't force you to act. It simply just plants seeds in your thought life and waters them until they grow into consuming fantasies. If you lack images to act on, what this spirit will do is suggest areas where you can get images to feed on. This is when the spirit begins to suggest pornographic websites. The moment you watch any of them, they now have a stored catalog of images they can use to tempt you with. It's worse because you now have an internal hard drive of stored images in your memory, which the enemy will keep using to replay in your mind, weakening you further. This demon is literally waging war in your thought life, trying to build strongholds of sexual fantasy that will eventually lead to physical sin. Another spirit will pressure and manipulate your emotions so that you begin to grow weaker and feel emotional. This is the spirit of emotional manipulation. It works by amplifying negative emotions like loneliness, rejection, inadequacy, or stress. These emotions become so overwhelming that you might seek sexual sin as a form of comfort or escape. This demon whispers key words like, "You're so stressed, you deserve this release," or "You're feeling lonely, this will make you feel better," or even, "You can simply confess after you do it." The spirit turns sexual sin into emotional medication, making you believe that giving into lust will somehow solve the emotional problems you're experiencing. Another spirit will then begin to suppress your rational mind so that you don't think clearly and make right decisions. When this demon is active, it will actively try to have you block scriptures that would normally help you resist. If you are watching TV and a sermon comes up, it will try to have you change the channel. It doesn't want anything that will take your mind off that temptation. You forget the consequences of sin. You rationalize behaviors you would normally recognize as wrong. Your judgment becomes clouded, and your ability to make godly decisions is severely impaired. All you keep thinking about is the pleasure of that sin. It deafens and blocks out God's word in your mind and just has you focus on the sin. From here, another spirit will orchestrate the right circumstances to enable you fall into temptation. This is the spirit of orchestration and timing. In fact, at that exact moment, you might have a member of the opposite sex pay you a visit, or you might suddenly start receiving flirtatious messages from someone you admired. This is strategy,